All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar, Composing, Doodling and Improvising, Encouraging Children's Own Music in Primary Schools, which is delivered by the ISM Trust. I'm Dr Alison Daubney, more of that in a minute. But before we begin, there's a few technical points. You should be able to see and hear me, but I can't see or hear you. And if you experience any technical difficulties, such as the sound quality or issues with anything like that, then please let us know in the question box and we'll make attempts to resolve the issue from our end. And if you've got any questions for me related to the webinar subject, just type them as you go through in the question box and I'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website, ism.org/webinars. So, on with today. Hi, my name is Ali D, lover of Yorkshire tea. Thanks so much for joining me to share ideas and chats. Lots of things for us to try. Take a risk, don't be shy. Try them in your classroom and have lots of fun with that. So, we've got some things today that we're going to look at from the Primary Toolkit and other things. So the Primary Toolkit, as you are probably aware, is on the ISM Trust website and it comes in 6 parts. Here are the 6 parts. Today, really we're most concerned about part 4, composing, improvising and doodling. And there's a reason I've chosen that particular terminology, which we'll talk about. But really, actually, composing, improvising and doodling covers lots of the other things too. It comes up in singing, it comes up with using musical instruments. So really this was just a way of kind of putting it all together into a toolkit. And of course, technology forms a really big part of that too. I wanted to start off by kind of laying out my ground, if you like, that for me, the musical experience that children have in primary school, the really rich experience, is about making music and creating music and then critically engaging with it as a listener, as a composer, as a fellow musician, in lots and lots of different ways, so that you know, the experience of music is something which they embody, not something they just talk about or something they learn facts about. And really, it's about thinking about imagination and freedom and all of the possibilities for helping young musicians to really thrive in primary schools. But I wanted to start off really looking at the importance of language. And if you took the term a composer, so Jo Glover's work, which is Children Composing 4 to 14, she did something really clever where she got young children to draw a composer. And, you know, what they drew was, you know, older people sitting at pianos, having notation in front of them, and kind of these ideas that she pulled together into different pictures. And it's kind of summarised as this. They'd have loads of paper all over the floor, probably quite messy. Someone with grey hair, they're 60 or 70 because they have to get used to writing music first. Now, I suppose my point about this is if you say to a child, go and compose, and the image they've got in their mind is somebody with mad hair, paper all over the floor, and who's very proficient in music writing and reading first, then maybe we've got a bit of a problem there, because that's the image of, you know, what they think they're trying to kind of recreate. And I kind of ask myself if this is really attainable. So that's why the seminar today is called Doodling. As well, because you would think about doodling in sound and you would doodle with art, and so thinking about what might be able to be possible with doodling with music, which is perhaps a lot less scary than saying go and compose, which sounds very rigid and perhaps a little bit unattainable. So I wanted to just talk about the idea of normalising creating as opposed to what I've put here as recreating. So Durrant and Welsh talked about music education and how it often is related to recreating, and how the music that they're recreating always happens to be that of an adult. But if I think of children I even probably walked past here today, sitting on the swings, swinging backwards and forwards, kind of playing with the material, the musical material that they know, and making up songs, making up silly songs, changing words, kind of having a musical smorgasbord of things, and going home, sitting on the kitchen floor with the saucepans and banging away. You know, so the idea of creating with very young children is something that we kind of take as being quite natural and quite normal. yet we need to be careful in music education that we give plenty of time and energy to creating rather than just recreating and making it sound like somebody else intended, because actually what we intended is really important too. So Painter and Aston, excuse me, they said, what contribution can music make? It can give immense pleasure to the listener and the performer, and this side of it should not be neglected. However, it is as a creative art that music is beginning to play an increasingly important role in education, bearing in mind this was written in 1970. Like all art, music springs from a profound response to life itself, and that's something perhaps we should hang on to, because the aesthetic response that we have to music and how it makes us feel is something that in our tick box world we actually probably end up overlooking quite a lot, but actually it's fundamental to music and what music does. And then they say perhaps we should place slightly more emphasis on creative music in schools than we have been doing. Music is a rich means of expression, and we should not deny our children the chance of using it. And that's something really that kind of underpins what we're talking about today and the things I would like to kind of agree with. So I thought today that hopefully in the comfort of your own surroundings that you might join me with some little activities, actually doodling with some sound, because I think for me one of the biggest things is people going, oh, I can't do that, that's not really what I would do, or I'm a bit scared, I don't know what will come out. And I think we all need to kind of have a go at trying some of these things. So we're going to doodle with sounds in different ways. So first of all, I invite you to pick up, a bit of, say, orange paint, and got my friend here from the ISM as well, who's going to pick up a bit of blue paint. And we're going to just doodle in space with our paint, and we're just going to make the noises as we go. So if it is, as she just did, like that, very excited, it might be wee. Okay, so just take a colour, and let's take a little doodle for about 30 seconds. I'm going to take some green. Oh, my friend here is not painting yet. Splat. I need to go back to the bit of green. I just need to go and fill it in. Actually, I want it to be a little bit more intense. So taking ideas and just kind of doodling with sounds as you would with paints. So kind of, if you put a piece of paper in front of you, you would do that on a piece of paper. We're doing it in the air today because we're on a webcam. But equally, they both work. You can take bits, you can colour them in. And there's a lot of integral kind of links between art and music, which you can pull out, and we'll pull some out this afternoon. So to give you some other examples of things that you can try, just some ideas I've written down here of things that I've done with an arts specialist that I've worked with in the past. So we've done a big unit of work around the book Where the World Things Are, which is a fantastic book, and we got the children artistically to create monsters by folding over bits of paper. One draws a head, everyone draws a head, and they pass them on. So by the time they get to the end, they've got really quite eclectic looking monsters. And then they have to think, how does their monster move? And then whilst their monster's moving, they have to think, what sounds does the monster make? What's it going to sound like when it moves? What's it going to sound like when it talks? So just ways into kind of exploring sounds. And I would hope that those are the kinds of things that everybody feels that they might be able to do. A third thing that I know I'm terrible about actually is either scatting or humming or whistling over anything that I kind of hear as I kind of wander around, and not feeling that there's a right and wrong, that I can only sing a melody of something and just kind of humming along, and I'm always getting into trouble for whistling. Just kind of making things up as you go along, and in the quiet of your own space, then that's a really good thing to do. And a little story that goes alongside that is that we're trying to teach children or to validate their experiences of being creative. So, for example, I used to work at a school in Lewes called Pell's Primary School, a fantastic little school, and our school song was written by Mary Martin, the deputy head, and it was something like, "This is our school, let it be filled with happiness." And then one day in assembly, a child who didn't really ever speak very much put up her hand and she said, "Can I suggest a change?" And Mary said yes, and she said, "Can we have, this is Pell's School, let it be filled with happiness?" And from then on, the school song had the name of that in. And Mary just completely validated her ideas and said, "That's fantastic, let's take that." And that's what we need to be able to do. So I suppose one of the suggestions is where you're using music that's maybe recreation, you're teaching a song, that you give some flexibility, and even if you just get them to make one small change, or you make one small change, because my feeling is, working with a lot of teachers, that if you can find the confidence to do this yourself, then it becomes much easier to be able to take that to work when you're working with young people. Which really leads me on to my next point. And I've said this, I think, in the last 2 webinars too, but creative behaviours need to be modelled by us. And we need to be saying, this is not a special thing for special people, but this is something that we can all do together. And therefore, whatever you're doing, it's crucial that you actually join in, and you try to encourage other adults in your classroom or your assembly to join in and demonstrate your own willingness to take creative risks and encourage everybody else to do the same. And I think a really good way to do this is to try and build the confidence for yourself. Like today, as I was saying, please just, go and try out some of these things as we go along. So, for example, you could take instruments home. When was the last time you took home a tambourine and thought to yourself, how many different ways are there that I could play that tambourine? And just kind of giving yourself the opportunity to take some of these instruments and explore them and try the possibilities and the different things that they can do. And the thing is, as I think I said on the first webinar, there isn't just one way to play an instrument or one sound that you can get out of them. And they're all valid. All the sounds we can make are valid for something. So, for example, taking a guiro, sitting everybody in a circle, you make a sound with it, you pass it to the next person, you ask them to play it in a different way. Now, we probably think we know what these things are going to sound like, and we've had those experiences potentially in the past, or if not, we could take a fairly calculated risk that doing that sounds a little bit the same as being bored and running your pencil along a radiator, those kinds of sounds, but and the way that they kind of materialise. But for the children that we're working with, these are really, really quick things that we can do, but they give them that experience of trying things out, and then also this idea of everything having different ways. So we're not always looking for something to be right and for it to be wrong. So picking things up, experimenting and exploring them, and then asking what if questions. Looking at an instrument on the floor and thinking, what if I took the biro lid and I went around the inside of the wooden part of that. What's that going to sound like? So kind of trying to get children to think about how to make the sounds they want, and then thinking about how you could use them. And then, of course, across the curriculum, you've got plenty of opportunities to be able to use the sounds. Do what the pupils do. Join in. Give yourself permission to do that, but try and make sure that the behaviours are things that you're modelling yourself. So this afternoon I've just got a few really small activities for us to try. This one here is just about finding ways in. So there's a sentence here which we're going to read. It was the first thing that came into my head, and I'm not sure why, because I live in Brighton and we don't have sandy beaches. Anyway, it says, my flip-flops are stuck in the sand. But actually, the my is the bit that's highlighted here. So we need to do something special with the y, the my, and then read the sentence. So it's saying, it's about ownership. It's my flip-flops are stuck in the sand, or my flip-flops are stuck in the sand. But then we could move that. We could do something with the word flip-flops. And if you read all of these through, you can see what's coming. You can make different changes in the sentence about the accentuation of the words. My flip-flops are stuck in the sand. 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 So there's different ways in which you can think of each of those. But this time we're going to go through, and as I'm doing this, perhaps you'd like to try this for yourself. You're just going to make some kind of melody on the accentuated word before you then go on to the rest. So my flip-flops are stuck in the sand. My flip-flops are stuck in the sand. My flip-flops are stuck in the sand. And I can't help myself but sing the parts. My flip-flops are stuck in the sand. So you're starting to take a word and think about melodic shape and the things that you can do. And they sound a little bit strange, and they're not the way that you might say a sentence, but they're giving people the possibility to be able to play with things in a very safe way. And if you've got a class to do this and read this, and everybody doing this together, then you've got a critical mass of noise. So it's not like I'm saying, hey, friend from the ISM, just do that now on your own. And she looks at me as if to say, you never told me you were going to do that, which is what children do. So there's something in there about thinking, don't put me on the spot. Make sure there's a possibility for me to be in my own space, or for everybody to have a critical mass of noise, which we're going to talk about again a little bit later to try things out. But you can see the idea. And really what I'm really saying with this is that playfulness is key. Some other things that I've been exploring a bit this year. So Paul Harris has got a fantastic set of flashcards. I don't know if you've come across them, and it's not a plug for his flashcards, but the ideas that go behind them. In that, I think the way he perceived them was that when children were practicing, they could pull out a card and it would say different things on it to go and try in the music, to just make something out of the first bar, or to focus only on one aspect. And so actually this year I've been kind of experimenting with making flashcards different ideas, so that when children need an idea or they're learning something all together, you can just pull out a flashcard and it's got a musical idea that everybody can just go and try, or the class can try together. And that's, I think, a really good way, because it adds in an idea, but in a relatively random fashion, but it's showing them, modelling for them all the different things that they can do. So now we are coming on to musical snowballs. And again, it's just something about kind of growing ideas. And I know it's very far from our thoughts today, let it snow, with a very warm day outside. But these are things that you can do kind of little and often. And I was trying to remember where I'd stolen this idea from. And I can't remember, but it might have been Kevin Rogers. So Kevin, thank you. But the idea is that you take a small musical sound. So I'm going to give a sound to my friend from the ISM here that just is, it's a plastic cup. Okay, that's her sound. And mine is just going to be, oh. Now we've got about 20 seconds in our own time just to take whatever sound. Sometimes children go, what? So I'll go, that's your sound, what? And then off we go. So you can do whatever you want with it. Just have a little experiment for about 20 seconds. And then we have lots of different snowballs around the classroom. Thank you, friend from the ISM. You can put the snowballs together. So you start off with a very small idea. And you know, they're the kind of thing that you can do at the beginning, in the middle of a class, at the end of a class. They don't have to be music lessons, but just kind of small ideas where you're saying to somebody, here's a germ of a musical idea. Go and germinate it. Go and grow it. And then get two groups together, get them to put one idea with the next idea. Excuse me. Here's another idea for you. Play me a little bit of Deep Purple. So as you can see, this is a Kandinsky painting, which has got lots of different colours on it. If people have different instruments, you can see different intensities of colours. So for example, you can see there's a kind of lighter yellow, and then there's a darker yellow, and there's very bright yellow, and then there's a kind of sun yellow. And so you would give everybody an instrument, or ask them to think about sounds that they can use around them in the environment. You appoint a conductor, and everybody has to choose their own colour. So for example, I might choose my colour as red. When the conductor is pointing to red, I play, but I have to think about the intensity and the way in which I make the red. So if it's a pinky red, it needs to sound a bit different to red. Other people might choose for themselves that it's yellow, or it's purple, or blue colour on here, or even white. And as the conductor points, only the people whose colour it is will play. You can have two conductors if you do this on a big interactive whiteboard. But I guess one of the things you can do with this is not tell anybody what colour you are, and then at the end, so there's another complexity to that, in that when they come off the side of the painting, then they know that that's silence and that's stopped. But also it makes the people who are playing have to be aware of everybody around them, because they're trying to work out if the person on the left and their right, well, are they yellow? Are they purple? Are they red? Excuse me. Oh dear, talking too much. We're going to move on to the place of composing in the national curriculum. And I suppose one of the things I've read a lot of recently is this thing about knowledge. And children have to have knowledge to be able to do something. Until you teach them the rules, they can't break them. Well, I'm going to have to disagree. Because as I was saying earlier about the children sitting on the swings, so while I just clear my throat, I'm going to let you have a quick lick. Oh dear. Well, that's never happened. Okay. Sorry about that. But as you can see, if you took the national curriculum and you made it into a Wordle, the word compose is one of the bigger words on there. But then so is perform. And often children will perform or play their own compositions. Voices is there, technology is there, identity is there, creating is there, discriminating, controlling. Loads and loads of things which point us towards being able to go and compose and to create our own music. So we can see that it's actually an integral part of the national curriculum. We're just going to pause it for a couple of seconds whilst I clear my throat. Sorry. Hopefully we're back on. So when we're thinking about expectations and what children's expectations are of their music and what our expectations are of them, we need to be really, really careful. Because when we say go and compose, just as they said at the beginning, we think a composer is somebody with a lot of grey hair and they can do this and they can do that and they can do the other. We need to be very careful about our expectations because, for example, we wouldn't expect them when they're writing a story to write War and Peace or something of that calibre. At this point in time, we wouldn't expect them to be able to pick up an instrument, to play something, to compose it really fluently and also to be able to notate it. And we wouldn't expect them to draw art of this kind of quality necessarily. You know, we know our own children, so we shouldn't have low expectations, but actually what they're composing, they need to be realistic, and so do we, about what that might be and what it might look like. So we're going to have a look at some different ways, and I'm hoping that at the end of the seminar today, then you will also share some ways with me in which everybody can kind of share the ideas that you've got. So the first one is about environment. We need to set an environment where we and the children that we're with are willing to take risks, and this kind of have a go philosophy. So for example, some examples for you. If we had a piece of music which we've all been learning, let's take this one. Arabella, Arabella, have you seen my new umbrella? As you can tell, it's only got 3 notes and it's a very simple piece, something the whole class have been learning together, something they can play. But then in the middle of that, you could put a little section so that everybody gets to explore for themselves at the same time as everybody else, so it would be quite a mess. So you would play your Arabella, Arabella, have you seen my new umbrella? Perhaps you might even play it twice, but then you get some bars of having a go at your own thing and then counting back and coming back to Arabella. So for example, and, you know, for somebody walking around the school, they might think, oh gosh, what a noise is going on there at the minute. But actually it's a really kind of creative noise, critical mass of sound, everybody buried in their own exploration of what's going on. And we need to find ways to do that so that it becomes a lot less daunting than putting children on the spot. But creating an environment where they will come in, that they're willing to take risks, pick up instruments, try them out, not get kind of pigeonholed into, I can only do this or I can only do that. Moving on to the second one, about the task itself. Well, what is the task? And is it open enough for children to be able to understand it in different ways and to find that there are ways to go and explore it? So, or do they only see it as, I'm looking for the answer that the teacher thinks they want to hear? The third one is about the parameters. What are the parameters of the music? Without it being a shopping list, it's got to have this, it's got to have that, it's got to the other. and it's not right unless you've got those things. Well, that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. But then if we give children complete freedom, sometimes that's too much. So putting in parameters around different notes they might use, or different structure, or different feel, or whatever it is you're trying to do, can be really, really helpful. So having some parameters, but making those open enough that there's room for exploration. Then thinking about the generation of ideas. What structures have you got in place to help children generate ideas? Back to the cup at the beginning. You know, all of those little things that we're doing, we're giving children ideas of things they can do. The more music they're exposed to as performers, as listeners, as composers, gives them more and more ideas and the basis of things to be able to go and play with. It's a bit like an artist having a sketchbook. So how can you help them to generate these musical ideas? And then also, how can you capture them in the real moment? You know, because actually they're kind of been and gone. So thinking about ways that when you're coming back to something, you can kind of go back to their ideas. And the problem with music is, here's my piece. I've been working on it for weeks. But the time's now gone. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember it. So I could record it, or we could discuss it. And, you know, the ways in which we try to capture the ideas about music and the generation of ideas is really important. We have to help them to understand that there's choices that they make. So for some children, it's a bit like having, write me a story and here's a blank page in front of you. And then they say, okay, but the problem with that is I don't know where to start. So what do? Often as a teacher, you would start with one word, well, I would start with a word in the middle of a page and then try and work out words from there. With music, you start with a note or a rhythm. Are you going to go up? Are you going to go down? So there's something in there about they have to make choices. And part of being a composer is making choices, which some children find really hard because other parts of education seem to shut down the idea of them trying to make choices, or at least that's their perception of them. Should I start quiet? Should I start loud? You know, all of these are choices that the composer has to make. So trying to give them the options to do that is a really, really good idea. And even if it's just standing in the middle of the room with one child with a beater, whilst the rest of the class are singing something that they know together, and that child with the beater trying to decide whether they want it loud or whether they want it quiet, and everybody having to follow those ideas. So getting them to kind of make the choices and recognise that those choices are there to be made. And here we've got about getting started, which we were just talking about really. So what is it that you might do to give them? You might give them a germ of an idea to start with, or you might hopefully help them to kind of generate that for themselves. Excuse me. If we're thinking about promoting creative behaviours, we need to think about encouraging talk, because I could write in my head a trumpet fanfare, but if you gave me a trumpet, I'd be hard pushed to get 2 notes out of it. And so therefore, what I play is not necessarily a very good idea for the listener of what it is that I was trying to actually create and get out of my head in the first place. So encouraging talking and learning about people's intentionality is really important, but it's also a great way of sharing ideas and generating ideas at various points of a process. So that's something that you need to kind of consider. How can you therefore put some time in to do that? There could be some planning time, which is a really great thing. So instead of just saying, okay, the instrument's here, off you go, at points you might say, okay, you've got 2 minutes. I want you to think about what you're going to do and come up with a plan of what you're going to try when you actually go to the instrument. So not always, but sometimes putting in planning time. And then also, of course, putting in reflection time for them to be able to talk about their music in the kind of eloquent way that they can talk about it and talk about the intentionality that the audience can't necessarily perceive, especially when it's in process. Groupings can be really, really crucial. So working in social groups that children are really comfortable with can be really helpful. It sometimes helps children to take risks they might not take when they're with children that they don't know so well. They're more easily able to communicate. They've already got a common understanding sometimes of how things might work and the strengths of people and what it is that they might try and bring to something. So you might want to think about how children are grouped, but whether you always put children in the same groups, possibly just move them around to try out different things with different people, bigger groups, smaller groups, pairs, the whole class doing things together. Sometimes, just very small times of doing things on their own. Just gives them an opportunity to do that. This is an interesting one about timing, because in the context of a lesson, you have, say, 30 seconds to do something, and you say, okay, go and do this, and then you might say at the end of that, okay, now you've got 30 minutes to, I'm going to split down into some 6 or 7 minute chunks to do that. But, is it the case that we all work at the same rate? But we probably don't, but we do need to give adequate time for children to go away and actually have a framework, but be able to play around with ideas. Pupils need to know how long they've got available, so it's no point in sending them off and go, right, okay, go and create whatever it is they're going to do. They need to know they've got 6 minutes or they've got 5 minutes. So giving them some kind of structure and an expectation of what they might do. But then during that time, as a teacher, finding ways to kind of help them. Another way, as I was talking about earlier, is modelling creative behaviours and modelling ideas. You don't have to do all that yourself. You can get pupils involved to share their own ideas and to do things together. But what you don't want to do is just give one idea. So giving multiple ideas is a really good strategy, because otherwise children are always trying to second guess what it is the teacher's wanting. So I only played that, so that's obviously what they're going to be asking for. So I'm just going to go and see if I can recreate that. No, actually, you want to try and give them multiple ideas, and the idea that they can then try things out, but it gives them some starting points. It needs to have a purpose, and the purpose needs to be something that the children you work with buy into. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I was at a school in Brighton, and the Year 6 class were doing some songwriting, and the songwriting definitely had a purpose to them, because, well, actually, I've seen 2 sets of songwriting this year, but one of them, for example, was about what does it feel like to be a refugee and somebody who's displaced, and they were doing quite a lot of project work around it. And at the end of it, they were raising money, and they got to make videos, and they totally bought into the purpose of what it is that they're doing, which is a great thing to be able to do. But it doesn't matter what it is; it needs to have, in their view, to be motivating. It needs to have a purpose. Otherwise, it becomes a paid by numbers exercise. That's another problem with it. So they need to be able to critique what they've got, to be able to discuss it. It goes back to what we said at the beginning, really, so that it's not just something that goes through from A to Z, but at various points there's opportunities for them to kind of revise and refine what they're doing there. And I suppose in a way we might call that assessing, but actually it's quite different to that, because it's much broader, because children themselves are involved in what they think about their music and where they might go next, and all of those kind of things. And you might use comments, you might use recordings, all of those things to have a kind of supportive process. So thinking about musical starting points, where can music come from? Well, hopefully you're getting the idea from today that personally I believe that musical starting points can come from anywhere. They can come from the songs they're learning, they can come from songs they know, they can come from music they're playing in their wider ops lessons, or little fragments of patterns, visual imagery, shapes, phrases, colours, words, sounds, moods, characters, so many different things that you can start from. Just, look around you now and think, oh, there's a dice on the floor. What happens if I throw the dice and out comes a 5? What happens if out comes a 3? What's the sound going to be different? So just finding ways around you to kind of use a starting point. So, we need to try to just find ways of exploring and encouraging this exploration, because the possibilities are literally endless. And so you're looking for kind of experimentation and playfulness, so that children can select, they can adapt, they can combine, they can manipulate, they can use technology, they can use instruments, they can use their voices, which is something we haven't really talked about today, but something that Shelley and I certainly talked about the last time round. I just very quickly wanted to put this up. I think they were mostly talking about secondary, but in 2005, Ofsted said, in most cases, too little time is spent experimenting or sketching out ideas, inventing new sounds, blends or patterns, mixing them or expanding them before putting them into structure and recording and storing them. The results show too little that moves pupils from copying styles suggested to them to work that demonstrates originality, initiative or experiment. And although that's talking about a secondary context, actually, if this is what they're saying is too little time, it gives us an idea, and I agree with some of these things, that we should be giving children the time to be able to do things where they can take sounds, they can blend them, they can invent them, they can just play with them, and they're not just trying to copy what somebody else has already put, and it kind of validates that idea. And I suppose linked to that, they said on there something about recording and storing them. Well, recording, audio recording and video recording is such an amazing way of being able to show somebody something in the process, because here's my music. But the time is gone, I can't remember. But if my friend from the ISM had recorded it, we could have a chat about it. We can go back to it, we can remember it, we can think about what we liked about it, what we might do next. Music happens in real time, so we have to find a way of capturing the magic. But we also have to listen a lot. We have to listen to children, we have to listen to find ways of getting those amazing tunes and ideas out of their heads. And thinking about, as I was saying earlier, how music makes you feel, as well as just the kind of otherwise tick list things of what you have. And therefore we need to take the idea away that a recording is not just part of a process, because it is part of a process, and it's a very important part. It's not just something we do and we store it in the bottom drawer, metaphorically speaking, on old tapes. Nowadays I know we store it in the cloud somewhere in the sky, but it's the same idea. It's not there for a purpose. But it could be. It's a really, really important part. And it's actually something about children's musical journey to be able to go back over time. At the end of the year in maths and English, they get to look back through their books and see the progress that they've made. With music, it's great for them to kind of hear and remember the things that they've done, as well as using them during the process. I wanted to share a couple of scenarios with you. Because they give the idea of what children do and what they might be able to do and more at different points in their kind of primary years development. And they're thinking of a few things about what might develop over time: structure, complexity, coherence, revision, being able to revise material and not just kind of go from A to Z and go, that's it, we're finished. Intentionality, what was it they intended? And of course, this idea of developing an internal sound bank. So I've got a scenario here from you from the early years. 2-year-old Jackie sits on the floor making a range of vocal sounds whilst moving her doll around in the air. Rebecca, the nursery teacher, joins Jackie on the floor and, with the help of a small brown teddy bear, initiates a musical conversation with Jackie's doll. This conversation continues for over 2 minutes, with Jackie and Rebecca exploring different aspects of their vocal capacity. In this time, they vary the tone, the pitch, the quality and the dynamics of a range of sounds, and move the doll and the teddy around in different ways. The music has a definite feel of a flow of a conversation. The sounds go backwards and forwards in turn between Jackie and Rebecca, sometimes with elements of repetition, extension and truncation, and sometimes with new ideas being introduced. Eventually, the conversation ends with Jackie saying, "Bye-bye, Dolly Doris," and waving her doll, the only identifiable words spoken during this entire musical interlude. So that's a very kind of early, natural response that children have, this curiosity about sound and about the world. So you can think about all of those things. What's the structure? What's the complexity? There's some coherence there. It means something to them. It's got some intentionality. They're taking ideas and they're growing them. Key stage 1. Year 1 pupils sat on the floor in a circle with a range of tuned and non-tuned percussion instruments in front of them. Earlier in the lesson, they had learnt a song about the weather, suggesting actions and vocal sounds for different weather conditions. Using a simple backing track, Mr. Robinson led the class in singing the 8-bar song, and then the children tapped their hands gently on their shoulders for the next 4 bars. During the final bar of this section, the voice on the recording said, 1, 2, 3, sing. A cue for the children to join back in with the singing. Mr. Robinson explained that instead of the 4 bars with the hands on shoulders, the pupils would use an instrument so as to create musical weather to accompany pictures that he held up. And then they would sing in between these musical interludes. To offer an example, he held up a picture of the rain, and children experimented with the sounds, with many making a rhythmic pitter-patter. Switching the card to wind, some swished the beaters back and forth along the colourful xylophones, copying and adapting to each other's musical ideas. Over the next 10 minutes, pupils rehearsed and recorded an original version of their own weather song. So that's kind of typical thing that these fill the gap kind of ideas that you might use at all different stages of learning. But you can see that the musical experience in a child's life has moved on from the original example of Jackie and Rebecca and the doll and the teddy, but still has the musical intentionality that was there before. Here's an example from lower key stage 2. Major Tim Peake's mission to the International Space Station has fueled Year 4's interest in space travel. Recently, they planted space seeds next to Earth seeds to compare the growth. They have been exploring music from Hosts of the Planet suite, particularly Mars, the Bringer of War, from the BBC 10 Pieces, and using the opening rhythm as a stimulus for practicing different notes and trying out different combinations of harmonies, those which sounded nice and those which they thought clashed. As part of a whole class instrumental programme, all the pupils have been learning either the trumpet or the clarinet for 12 weeks. In this part of the lesson, they were encouraged to use these instruments to develop their own pieces in small groups based around the opening rhythm of Mars, with instruction that the piece must last no longer than 30 seconds, so putting some parameters in, and that it must have a definite ending which is obvious to the audience. All of the group's musical offers are recorded one after another, without a gap in between, because it's obvious where they're going to finish. And then they're played in assembly as the other children walk in. So it's got intentionality and it's got purpose. And it's accompanied by a slideshow showing pictures from space. So that's taking something that they're doing in another aspect of music education, a whole class programme, kind of thinking about it in relation to this too. And here's the final example, I suppose something from upper key stage 2. So Year 6 has experimented with simple looping programmes, learning how to import, audition, select and alter rhythmic and melodic loops. From a choice of 4 films lasting 30 to 45 seconds, pupils are set the challenge of using their loops to create a soundtrack to accompany the film using the loops. Some of the children in the class are already adept at this kind of software and are paired up purposely, so that those with more experience can offer help to others in the class to develop their technological skills and share their musical ideas. So you can see that over time, there are lots of different things that relate to structure, complexity, coherence, revision, intentionality, finding ways which children might explore their own music and kind of develop their ideas, sometimes within a framework, sometimes with a little bit more freedom. But really the ideas are endless. And I put here the title ownership. So to give children ownership, we have to give them the time, the space, materials, the motivation and the purpose. We also have to think very much about how we are guiding and supporting pupils, because actually if we are going to a group of pupils and as a teacher we know there's only 5 minutes left, listening to something and kind of going, yes, 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 I think you should do this, and we're not leaving ownership. So thinking of ways that we can ask questions and generate kind of support and ideas rather than kind of jumping in and offering our own ideas, so that we keep the ownership with them. So basically putting in place a framework to generate, explore, develop, adapt and sort, accept and reject ideas, which is something that they will do over time. We're running towards the end of the seminar, the webinar even. I wanted to just remind you about this framework which Martin Faultley and I put together to help teachers with sorting out a music education and planning and thinking about what it is, what are the desired skills and those kinds of things. And this is available on the ISM Trust website. It talks here about what is assessment for, so it's for medium term, long term, short term, and it gives some ideas about different outcomes and different things you might be looking for at different points. And here's the address, ismtrust.org/resources/education. I suppose I pulled up to conclude with John Finney's amazing quote, "Knowing music in the bones is what counts." And this really resounds with me, and it's something that John wrote on his blog in 2015 that has kind of really stuck with me. And it's about the experience, I think, of doing music, that music is something that is there to go and do and to try. And as a teacher, as a primary school teacher, as a secondary school teacher, as a nursery teacher or assistant or whatever your role may be, actually going and doing it and feeling it and thinking about it is actually what counts in music education. So I suppose I just kind of wanted to flag that up to think about. I'll give a really quick flag. I was really embarrassed. Teaching primary music, the 4 scenarios I put up today are from Teaching Primary Music, which came out last year, and there's some information on it here. And the toolkit, very kindly, Sage have let me pull some ideas from the toolkit, but there's obviously a lot more kind of ideas in that. In terms of what next, if you want to kind of follow anything up, then you can contact Neil Higgins, who's at the ISM Trust, about the toolkit. But in terms of kind of resources and ideas, well, firstly, we have just a few minutes today where people might be willing to share some of the amazing ideas and the things that they've done. Secondly, go and look at other schools and their websites and listen to the ideas that their children have come up with, because that's, I think, a really, really great way to generate kind of ideas about the kinds of things that you could adapt in your own classroom. So for me, back to the planning, I mean, it's about thinking about what is it that I'm trying to get them to be able to do, and then planning inspiring activities around those kinds of things. And really today we've just kind of scratched the surface, and I think from the things that I see, there's so much good stuff going on out there that we just need to kind of communicate with each other about, and kind of share some ideas. So the toolkit is free to download, as I said, and this is the national curriculum resources that are available too, and you can scroll back through the webinar when it goes up online later if there's things that you want to look at. So while I have some water, I'm going to think about getting you to write some questions. I can see I've got some coming in already. So if you want to write up any questions, and we can spend the last few minutes having a look at some of the responses to these. So first of all, I'm going to take a question from James. And he said, what is the very first step with a new class? And I'm assuming, James, you're meaning a primary class. And I'm guessing that you might mean a class that you have anyway, because of course in music quite often there are many things that we can do as a class teacher, which kind of help. What's the first thing I'd do? I'd probably do something related to I'd probably do something first off related to singing, and something that they know and something that they love and something that they would enjoy. And then, as I was saying at the beginning, I'd find a way to weave into that some silly little sections of things that give a framework for them to go and kind of try different things out, using body percussion, using different things that are around them. But basically having this critical mass of noise so that within my framework there is a space for people to be able to try things out, feeling that they're enjoying themselves, that they're supported and nobody's actually looking at them, and then kind of bring them back together. So that's for me the new steps that I would try with the first class. But of course, as I was saying earlier, I think it's about being part of that yourself and kind of modelling those ideas and being willing to not just tell them what to do, but being part of that kind of musical context as well. So I hope that answers your question, but you can type for me anything else. So I've got something here from Emily that relates to that. It's probably one idea I've come across is kids making graphic scores. Have you come across this idea? Yes, I have. How would you use this idea in the classroom? Crikey, this is a whole, there's so many things you can do with graphic score. The idea, I suppose, is it's a way for me into them recognising there's a relationship between a symbol and a sound. So the first thing I might do is on a whiteboard or a flip chart, which I can see in front of me right now, I might, could my friend from the ISM pass me the flip chart? Would that be okay? And I might just spontaneously write a little graphic score that we could try together. I just need one big piece of paper off it. What I'm trying to get them to recognise is that the symbol and the sound have got a relationship. And actually this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot. So there's a chapter, I'm plugging it again, but Teaching Primary Music, where I was thinking about the ideas of these two things together. So for example, my graphic score looks like this. She says, doing her utmost to right, okay, I'm not sure if you can see that or not. Let's move the webcam back over so that we can see. So you might be able to see my graphic score, and if we read it from left to right, here we go. And we're just going to try this together. So it goes, So taking an idea and just getting them to read it all together. And although they might not do exactly the same things, it's giving them the idea that when you're pointing to something that's not got a symbol, then there's probably no sound coming out. So it's kind of recognised in the first instance that there's those things, but then there are plenty of ideas about what you then do with graphic scores. So you might start at using just one line of, if you want to call it, score, and you might get them to just try something themselves. There's two ways really, and then finding a way to write it down in some way. So children's invented notation, we might actually call that often some kind of graphic score. The other way is kind of the symbol first, which so they write something down and then they read it, but actually what they're getting from that is a skill for reading rather than being inventive necessarily. But they do have to be inventive the other way around and kind of write things down. But there's quite a lot of things around. A lot of the published schemes have got things around graphic scores in different ways and at different stages. And I think it's something you can start very young with children, actually. So I think it's a brilliant idea, Emily. Thank you. Got a question here from Alice. It's an interesting question. How do you manage constraints of small rooms and many children? Crikey, well, this is our life, isn't it, really, in a primary school or any kind of music classroom. And it always amazes me if you put children into groups, even in quite a small space, that they are able to kind of absorb themselves in the sound of things that are going on. There's something in there about volume control that's really quite important in getting them to kind of keep the ideas down. I've seen it with planning time, that you can give children some planning time while others are trying out things on instruments, and then you go back to giving them a tiny bit of planning time so that there's some swapping around going on so that not everybody is playing at the same time. But I think for me, well, as a music teacher, I'm basically a glorified furniture remover. And so one of the things is about how do I organise the physical space in my room. And personally, I like sitting on the floor and I like using the space and kind of thinking of it that way. I think tables, but often if your children are working in groups, they can't hear each other really well around tables. So using the break time to kind of move stuff in and out, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, but thinking about the physical constraints and what you can do to kind of overcome that in some ways as well. Using different beaters, because some instruments, if you're using them with some beaters, will come out, like the wooden beaters, for example, kind of really ring through, but Granny's knitted beaters, actually, they dampen sounds quite a lot, and then they can change them at the end with their intentionality if they kind of want to. But yeah, that's some of my ideas, but I'm sure that our audience today has got some other ideas too. So I don't know if anybody else has any more questions while I take a swig of water. If you have, then feel free to type them up. Oh, okay. Can we just see the screen there? Read whole class composing versus noise and space. Says Joanna. Thank you, Joanna. Something I do is regular mini plenaries, definitely, where we stop and share a few ideas or have 2 minutes with only the quiet instruments, just the drums, etc., etc. The idea of mini plenaries is just brilliant. So basically, where you're doing something together, and then either the whole class might stop and listen to one group and get some discussion and some feedback and some ideas going forward. Or alternatively, you can just pair groups up. So instead of having to listen to the whole class, it's just one group listening to another group and things like that. So mini plenaries, it also refocuses them. So my thing about working with primary age children is not to let them go for too long without having some kind of way of pulling them back together, either through being in their physical space as a little group or doing something like that. So that's a really great idea if you think of your lesson in lots of different ways. Thank you, Joanna, that's really helpful. This one here, do you have any suggestions for including pupils with special educational needs and disability during composition, particularly as it can be noisy and uncomfortable? This is actually a real consideration. And I think it's not just about composing, it's just about, it's a really serious thing about being in that space with those people with that noise going on. And I mean, there isn't just one way to do things, and it kind of depends on, this is going to sound like a complete cop-out answer, but it depends on the pupils that you've got and how you know that you can help them with noise, and also actually not just with noise, but for me, some of them it's very uncomfortable to do something which is not very rigid, you know. So if you're saying go and try this for yourself or come up with your idea, I need you to tell me, how are we going to start, you know. So so knowing the people that you're working with and what it is that kind of helps them, who is it that they work best with, what kind of support might they need from you, what kind of support might or might not they need from somebody else. So I think really it's a question of kind of thinking about who those people are. Now, I've just got my hands on, and I haven't read it yet, but a new book by Diane Patterson about working with special educational needs and disability in music education. And as a practitioner, I know her, and I know that her ideas are brilliant. So perhaps that's something that I can go away and look at, and you might consider going and looking at too. Oh, the $50 million question from Claire. How to encourage staff to participate in music when they themselves are not very confident. Come across this all the time, and the last time I did a webinar I was working with Shelley, and it's something that over the years we've both come across many, many times. And I think the issue with this is that you need to find ways in that people are initially, that they're initially comfortable with. So like, for example, there's activities that we had at the beginning with playing with words, and also encouraging people to try things out in their own space. Because if I said to I don't know, Rebecca, today in the lesson, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, which is going to make you feel musically unconfident, then that's, you know, that's kind of not a very good starting point. So trying to find ways that they are forewarned about the things that are coming, and you give them the time and the space to go away and think about them and try them out themselves, or you've done things in staff meetings. It's so well known that there's a huge lack of confidence, which is a crying shame in primary music education. And it's about context, because often people who say, I'm really not very confident, I couldn't really do that in a classroom, would quite happily stand in a field at Glastonbury with mud up to their knees, singing their hearts out. So it is partly about context and where they are. But doing things little and often, using things through literacy, doing things with music through the curriculum, giving them plenty of kind of opportunities for that kind of thing first. So if you go to part 6 of the primary toolkit, there's quite a bit in there about ideas for how to start putting music through the curriculum as a kind of start, which for some people seems to be a much easier way in. I think we're running out of time, so well, I've got a little song for you to finish off with. So some melodies, particularly hymn melodies, I just wanted to kind of point this out, are really, really well balanced, and you can do things. So this is an idea around literacy, because actually I teach the primary music trainees at the university I work with, and as they come in the room you can see them going, oh, I hated music when I was at school, oh, rubbish at music, oh, I'm not very good. And then by the end of 2 hours they're doing things, they're playing, they're singing, they're trying things out, and it's about making people feel competent. One of the things that I do with them is to take this tune, and it goes da 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 da, and we count the syllables on each line. And then, so the first one's got 8, so it's 8 7 8 7, and they have to rhyme various bits as they go along. So here's my tune for you today. And as I said to you to the people who joined us in the second webinar, if you're doing singing, it's about finding pitch ranges which are suitable for primary voices. So here's my starting note for today. You have all been so amazing, taking risks and having fun. Now it's time to try ideas out. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you for joining us.